My planet Arrakis is so beautiful when the sun is low. You can see spice in the air.
Nothing like a bit of major flooding to set the right mood for making a scene that takes place on the desert planet of Arrakis. But the people had their say and the poll was conclusive, so here we are. Greetings. It's good to see you again, and some things have changed. Microphone has moved to my left, so it doesn't block the light. What an idea. And I have a new audio interface that I'm using with the mic, because it turns out my old one was broken since I got it 9 years ago. So that should make the audio a bit better, and then I turned a render on, so now I've got fans going, which should completely annihilate it. Now, back to Arrakis. Which scene to choose is completely up to me, so of course, I went for the scene where Duke Mahdi Paul Muad'Dib Lisan al-Gaib Usul Kwisatz Haderach Atreides delivers his big speech to about 200,000 Fremen that would all need to be animated. If you've been around the game for a while, you know that making a single person in 3D well is massively difficult. There's only a handful of artists that can do it on the entire planet, this planet, not sure about Arrakis, and there's fewer still that can do it quickly. And I am absolutely not either of those people. But making about 100,000 people, although still a total pain, is nowhere near as difficult. And this scene is actually perfect for me to improve something that I've been working on with myself for a while. But we'll get to that later. First, why the did I actually pick this scene in the first place? Well, just look at it. Absolutely gorgeous. When it comes to Kino vibes, this scene absolutely oozes of them. Secondly, on the Kino vibes course, this will be a practice scene for lighting interiors for scale, making the interior spaces feel either bigger or smaller with lighting. Something the crew has done for this scene so beautifully, both with the lighting, with the production, and the shot design.
The fun part of this one is that obviously we have the world of the Fremen. It is bigger and more massive, more action, 40% more sets.
Now looking at it all the individual pieces of the scene, costume design, set design, the staging, the lighting, everything is so exquisitely put together. The collaboration of literally thousands of people to create an entire world for us, complete with culture, ecology, cosmology. And now it's my turn to try and match that. What can possibly go wrong? So anyway, I started blasting. First thing, block out the layout. Couple of cylinders, a few thousand people, and a roof with holes in it to let in some light. Since the light is actually the whole point of making this scene at all, I wanted to get that in pretty early and pretty close. And yeah, it's not a bad match. It looks vaguely reminiscent of the scene, doesn't it? But now begins the slog. I've got my placeholder, but now I have to do all of this properly. And right on cue comes the thing I need to work on. Right, so I have a brain parasite, and I'm pretty sure you have the same brain parasite too. In the back of my head, living rent-free for as long as I can remember, is a tiny creature with 6 squiggly legs, 2 pin eyes, and a spiky lump of a body, and a very shrill voice. And this is the Perfectionism parasite, aka the common nitpick. And you know, contrary to popular belief, he's not actually a bad dude. Sometimes he's got good points. Sometimes the little fella whispers just the right words for me to push my work that little bit further and tweak a little detail that just lifts the whole piece up a whole notch. So credit where credit is due. The Perfectionism parasite can be worth listening to. Sometimes. And that's where the emphasis is. Sometimes. See, here's the thing. The nitpick is awfully nearsighted. The only thing he sees are details. Any kind of bigger picture is just completely lost on him. He cannot see the forest. He can only see the speck on the bark of the nearest tree. And that would be fine, if that was all it was. But he also happens to be a loud and whiny little bitch. Even now I can hear him complaining in the back of my head on how I intonate the words and the rhythm of my speech. Basically, he's an annoying idiot, but with impeccable taste. And having that constantly in your ear, especially in the beginning of a project, is no bueno.
Hey, the spacing on those characters, it doesn't look even. Oh, are you really going to leave the cloth like that? Is this really the animation you're going to use for Paul? It's not what he does in the movie, is it?
It's like having the dang Microsoft paperclip in your head, but somehow even more useless and more intrusive. At the best, it slows you down, sending you off on useless quests to perfect random placeholder items you've built. But at worst, the voice of the nitpick becomes loud. It becomes so loud, it drowns out anything else, and you get total paralysis. Honestly, nothing breeds procrastination more than perfection. Focusing on each grain of sand makes the whole Dune seem impossibly huge. And doing anything else in the world will seem a lot more appealing to you than getting on with the work. Especially, say, the allure of a so simple and so undemanding doom scroll across the internet. But that is no purpose for life. But the reason, however, it's so hard to beat the perfectionism parasite is because it speaks truth. Check it. With the placeholder bits in place, I start on the proper assets. As a scene, there's actually not that many, but they all do have a very specific and purposeful aesthetic. The platform and stone blocks, for instance, all have this very intricate pattern of symbols going around the outside of them.
The prophecy written, the story of the Fremen is written on the floor, on the walls, and the aesthetics.
Now, sadly, I couldn't find any footage or photography showing what the inscriptions specifically say. I know it's a combination of some runes and hieroglyphics, but luckily, I have a bunch of patrons, and I owe them immortality. So I took all of your names, got myself a couple of symbol and cuneiform style fonts, and I turned them into a nice Fremen style pattern of religious inscriptions that I could use as a displacement map. All the while, the nitpick wailed at me.
Oh, look at that. The character spacing is all out of whack.
And it spoke the truth. It was a bit all over the place, especially with these fonts. I continued with making the weird rocky cubes, inscribing the names of my patron on those, and the nitpick shrieked.
Why are you using all the same textures on all of them? That would look cheap and lazy.
And seeing them side by side, he spoke truth. I went on to make the different level of details for the people in the crowd, and the nitpick damn near shat himself. He grabbed onto my brain with all his little claws, and he shook me and yelled,
I know a place on the edge of the red light district where we can lay low, but my hands are all messed up, so you better drive, brother.
Of course, the perfectionism parasite was truthful again. And then came the cloth sims. My god. The cloth sims. All kinds of simulation work is always a bit hit or miss. You never know exactly what you're going to get when you hit that simulate button. Cloth sims are in a league of their own. And once I had a result that was borderline acceptable, who was there if not the nitpick?
Hey, that looks a lot more like a type of leather cloth than a light linen silk blend. You should probably learn a different software for this task.
And as always, the nitpick was truthful. It did look kind of leathery, and there's specific softwares that do cloth much better than Cinema 4D. Oh, and looking at this, if you're wondering why my characters all look a bit familiar, I have a perfectly good reason for that. Anyway, after the better part of a week, I had my assets made. Cheap looking, lazily made set pieces, people that could be straight out of GTA 3, and robes that moved like they were out of Marilyn Manson's closet. And honestly, that's a success. Because the thing is this, those are all details that don't matter. Doesn't matter. It's just individual grains of sand, all slightly out of place, sure, but together forming a perfectly fine sand dune. The big picture is all there, even if individual details aren't all quite right. The perfectionism parasite we carry inverts the old biblical saying of seeing the speck in your brother's eye but not the plank in your own. When it comes to art, it's often the complete opposite. In your own work, you see every mistake in every detail. Every shaky brushstroke or every out-of-place pixel shines like a lighthouse straight into your eyes. But looking at someone else's work, we see none of that. We see their work as it is, not as separate bits, but as a complete piece. And I'm sure the artists working on even something like this scene of Dune can all spot tiny things that they wish they would have fixed. Let's actually try that. Let's pretend that I made the original scene. This original scene was mine. And now I shall unleash my parasite upon it. Okay, stop. First thing to notice is the beams of light through the air. They don't quite match the sunspots on the floor. This beam, for instance, is wider than this one, but on the spots on the floor, it's the opposite. So that needs fixing. Okay, next thing, this podium/platform thing that he's standing on looks actually kind of fake. It's halfway between man-made and natural, and it kind of feels like neither. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but that's what it feels like. So, fix that. Alright, next one. This bit. When the crowd all stands up and starts to chant, it just doesn't look right. For some reason, the people look far too uniform, and it also doesn't look like they've taken into account the delay that would be caused by the speed of sound at these scales. Alright, these are all pedantic things, right? True. Changing those things wouldn't make the scene any better, and it sounds actually silly when I say them. But that's perfectionism for you. That's exactly what the nitpick does. It just becomes a lot more obvious when you direct that internal dialogue to something external. That's when you see how silly it actually becomes. But what can you even do? Like, if the perfectionism parasite has you in its grip, paralyzed, procrastinating, what can you do? Well, you can't kill it. The parasite is part of you whether you like it or not. You can't silence it. It's always inside of you. But you can drive it back a bit further down into your brain and just make it pipe down a little fucking bit. Number 1, play. How's that going to help? Well, the nitpick can smell when something is serious. It's kind of like a T-Rex, but instead of only seeing movement, the parasite sees only serious things. Thinking the thought that this actually matters is like sounding a horn that summons it. But you know what's not serious? Play. It's the opposite of serious. With play, the result doesn't even matter. With play, the process is the purpose. You're just trying things out for the sake of trying them out. And if you approach your work a bit more like play, the nitpick will ease its grip. Number 2, flux. The parasite only cares about one thing, and that's results here and now. It doesn't understand the future, it doesn't understand the past, it doesn't understand budget, deadline, or what's physically possible. It only sees what's right in front of it at this very moment. Flux means that everything is subject to change. Nothing is final. You're right, you tell the parasite. It looks like shit right now, but that's temporary. It's all part of the process, and it's all going to change. An old adage of writing is to say it straight and then say it great. And that's about exactly the same thing. What you actually end up changing in the end doesn't really matter. The parasite shuts up, and you can get on with your work. Number 3, rock and roll. This is the nuclear option. When all else fails, just say, fuck it. It's rock and roll. That might mean not all the details end up perfect. Maybe it's a bit rough around the edges, but the point is there and la pasión is there. The nitpick feeds on your brain. So whatever you feed your brain is what you feed the nitpick. If you feed it a different set of standards, the nitpick can't help but to adapt. If you tell it, it's rock and roll, the damn thing might even complain if you make it too perfect, saying it's not rough around the edges enough. Some of my favorite projects have been the more rock and roll ones. The ones where I didn't poke around with specific details until my eyes turned red, where I had to go fast enough to focus only on what mattered. Speaking of, how is my Dune doing? I've got my assets done, all made, all put in the scene, and here's what it all looks like together. Not bad, right? Pretty close to the original, right? And truth be told, I'm kind of sick of working on this project, so I'm just going to leave it like it is and move on. At the beginning of the video, I told you that the nitpick was worth listening to sometimes. And then I went on to slander it non-stop. But I do actually mean it. And I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but there is a second parasite living in your brain. It's not as loud as the nitpick or quite as obvious, but during the project, he slowly creeps around there, covers your brain in his goop that makes it hard to think about doing any more work on the project. And his name is the slump. The nitpick has a place in your art, and this is it. The nitpick is the only parasitic entity living in your brain with the energy to clear that goop and drive back the slump. Let's see it in action. Let's see how it does it. Here's my scene, right? As it is. It's a low resolution preview render, but all in all, the bits are there. It doesn't look too bad. But now we unleash the nitpick.
Needs more variation in the clothing. Needs more variation in the animations. Atmosphere is too uniform. Medium distance crowd needs to be denser. Our crowd needs better animation. This guy gets stepped on by Muad'Dib. The light rays don't really match the original that well, no matter how much you tried. And if you do not fix these things, you will never have a good night's sleep again.
Okay, thank you, nitpick. Feedback clearly defined, written out. Slump effectively driven back into the shadows. I'm ready for round 2, baby. Okay, so did the nitpick manage to get me to make my entire scene perfect in the end? I think it turned out okay, but you tell me. In the beginning of the video, when I played the original Dune scene, my final shot was in there. So, did you spot it? Did it stick out like a sore thumb? Or was it perfectly acceptable? I think it was perfectly acceptable. My nitpick disagreed. Either way, I'm happy, because that gets me one step closer to finishing the whole Kino Vibes course. Unless that's the slump talking, in which case... no. You tell me if the shot was good enough. Keep the nitpick and the slump fighting in your head so that you can stay in motion.
Muad'Dib is wise in the ways of the desert, the one who points the way. That is a powerful name.